Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. And the movie I'd like to talk about today comes from 1941, and this is The Little Foxes, starring Bette Davis, directed by William Wyler. And this is the third and last of their collaboration. My previous two videos, I talked about 1938's Jezebel and from 1940, The Letter. Davis often said that Wyler was her favorite director, the best director she ever worked for. But on The Little Foxes, their amicable working relationship sort of fell apart a little. And I also am going to talk a little bit about the story of the backstory of The Little Foxes as revealed in Barbara Lemming's biography of Bette Davis, because there's quite a lot of really interesting information in this book concerning the filming of The Little Foxes. Now, The Little Foxes was based on a very successful Broadway play written by Lillian Hellman. And all three of these films, these Wyler-Davis films, were based on stage plays. Wyler was probably the best director of all time in adopting stage plays in a cinematic way. The stage play was a big success. It starred Tallulah Bankhead as Regina, and Bette Davis would play this part in the movie, which is set in 1900 in a southern town. Bette Davis has two brothers. Their father had evidently been very rich. He left the two boys, now older men, the bulk of the fortune. So Bette Davis really doesn't have a fortune, but she did marry a rich man, played by Herbert Marshall, but he's very sickly. He has a serious heart condition, and they don't get along, at all, Regina and her husband. Now, the brothers bring an investor for a big scheme that's going to make everybody super wealthy from Chicago, and they're going to build a mill, and the idea is we're going to bring the mills to the cotton rather than bringing the cotton to the mills. So as part, they're going to use the land that the two brothers own, that they have inherited from their father, but they have to invest money of their own. The family has not. It's still very wealthy, at least by all accounts. Regina is not wealthy, but her husband's wealthy. So they each have to put in a share into this scheme, but they also need Regina to be a third of this. Of this investment, but she has to convince her husband to provide the money for this scheme that they have developed, and the scheme it is. But unfortunately for Regina, she not only doesn't get along with them, they're totally different. She dreams of going to Chicago with this newfound wealth of her own and becoming a socialite. But her husband sees through this scheme as bringing a sweatshop to the local community. The Chicago investor says we pay $8 a week for our labor, but down south they'd only be able to they would be able to get by with paying $3 an hour in terrible working conditions. At least that's the way Regina's husband sees it. So this is a big impediment to this investment, and so the two brothers have to really connive, and Regina is not part of it. How can we make it without Regina? They come up with another scheme that is really quite horrific, even to Regina when she finds out about it, involving Regina's nephew, one of the sons. This is played by Dan Duryea, who plays a big role in the scheme to get the money to Chicago in time for this investment to be successful. So greed here is the paramount issue. Just, the lust for money is the overwhelming And well, the accoutrements that money can buy is the overwhelming motivation within this family. But it is very much an ensemble piece. So Bette Davis is off screen a lot through this film, and she worried about that. And originally, she didn't want to play the part because, I'm not there. I'm a big star. I should be in more scenes. And an ensemble piece where some of the actors came from the original Broadway production, including Teresa Wright. This is Teresa Wright's debut film, and she is more like her father. She's not like Regina. She begins to see through her mother, see what her mother really is. And she has an aunt. One of the brothers has a wife, Aunt Bertie, and played by Patricia Collins, and she's just terrific in this movie. And this was her debut. She played the part on Broadway, and a couple years later, she would play Teresa Wright's mother in Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. And she has taken to drink because her husband doesn't pay any attention to her and sort of disparages her. But she's a very kindly soul. She has some terrific scenes in this film. I have to mention Jessie Greason, who plays the main servant in the house called Addie. She's just terrific. And as in Jezebel, when Wyler populated the film with lots of slaves to emphasize how this privileged life of the wealthy is so dependent on the labor of the slaves, here they're not slaves anymore in 1900, but they're servants, and they're everywhere. And so Addie is a servant, but evidently a long-time servant, and she's almost become part of the family. But we see these servants everywhere. Now we have to talk a little bit about the conception of Regina as Bette Davis plays her. Because now this was a big success, as I said, and the part of Regina was so associated with Tallulah Bankhead. Now in these days, plays were a big part. They had cultural cachet, and so plays that were highly successful on Broadway would often tour the whole country. And the little Foxes did that. So Tallulah Bankhead would tour in almost every major city in the United States, so everybody knew this play, and again very much associated with Tallulah Bankhead. And William Wyler was a big admirer of Bankhead's performance in this, but Bette Davis had not seen the play, but she did finally see it at the end of its road tour. And I think she was driving cross country with her current husband, and they stopped off in Cleveland. And by this time, Tallulah Bankhead, who had given a very subtle, very sexy, humorous and complex character of Regina, by the time she was in Cleveland, according to Lillian Hellman, she was cocaine addicted and she was becoming very flamboyant. And that's the performance that Bette Davis saw, and she thought that was the way it should be played. Wyler had seen her on Broadway, where again it was Regina was a much more complex character, and Wyler very much associated with Lillian Hellman because he had done These Three, which was based on the Children's Hour, and again later on, and he would make a remake of that in the 1960s. Very good friends with Hellman, and supported her when her financial situation was bad because she was blacklisted. Her companion, Dashiell Hammett, the writer of The Thin Man and Maltese Falcon, was in jail for his, actually I think he was in jail for contempt of court. It wasn't the House Un-American Activities Committee, but it was a similar situation where he would not name names. And so the prominence of plays during that period was such that, well, Bette Davis is going to play this part. Now, Bette Davis was only 33 years old when she's playing this part in Regina is evidently in her 40s. Teresa Wright is of marriageable years. So she had a great deal of trouble trying to acclimate herself. How is she going to do this? She's only 33, and that's far too young for a Hollywood actress uh, to start playing motherly characters. So she appears on the set with the costume that she had chosen, which included this grotesque-looking wig, at least in William Wyler's opinion, and white powder on her face. She was dead white and mask-like, Wyler said, and grotesque. And Wyler says, "Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? This isn't the character. Regina's supposed to be sexy and lively and, like I say, a complex human being." And also, Bette Davis was relying on her mannerisms, and that was the mannerisms when, in the first film that they made together, Jezebel, the mannerisms that Wyler was trying to not tamp down totally, but to modulate them, so that it wouldn't dominate the character as he saw it. And he even and they battled. Bette Davis left the set for a couple of weeks and said, "Get Tallulah Bankin." Now she was under contract to Warner Brothers. This was a Goldwyn movie. Jack Warner did not want to loan out his stars to other studios, but he wanted Gary Cooper for Sergeant York, so it was sort of like a trade. And by this time too, Bette Davis was in the middle of this incredible run. She had become so popular. Every movie from Jezebel on to the late 40s, or the middle 40s at least, was making money. A run of about 10 or 12 movies in a row. So she felt like she knew how to play the part. This is the way I'm going to play it. In subsequent movies, William Wyler was not only the best director, but he was the most powerful director. I mean, he had real power in Hollywood. The other directors that she worked for subsequently, they were good. Some of them very good directors, but they pretty much had to let Bette Davis do what she wanted to do. And in William Wyler's mind, and some of these directors who would give up fighting with her, as Wyler did in the little Foxes, she wanted to play Bette Davis. "I know what my fans like," she would constantly tell directors. This is what my fans come to see. So this is very much different than what Wyler tried to teach her, is to be inside the character. Don't be outside. Don't play the character by mannerisms. He was always critical of the way she moved her head, turned her head so dramatically back and forth. And that's what she did. And subsequently, she became, when she became 40, or soon to become 40, Warner Brothers, that was the sell-by age for actresses in Hollywood, probably even to a certain extent today. And so that they didn't renew her contract. She was on her own, and she wasn't picking very good roles, but perhaps she wasn't being offered very good roles. But then with All But Eve in 1950, she did get a good role with another and a very powerful man, Hollywood man, in Joe Mankiewicz, and again playing a version of herself, to be sure, in All But Eve. But it was a big success, and she was greatly lauded for that performance. But after that, it was just basically she just took whatever she could get. She was drinking very heavily after All But Eve. She marries Gary Merrill, who is the co-star of hers in All But Eve. They had a 10-year marriage that is just absolute horror show. If you go by Barbara Lemming's biography, full of drunken brawls and abuse of the kids and alcohol, and I mean, not to believe Barbara Lemming's book, mental illness for sure. was overwhelming her, and her she was in the original cast of Tennessee Williams' Night of the Iguana. That was a debacle. Uh, I mean, it's a story where she was so cruel to her fellow actors, including Patrick O'Neill, if you know Patrick O'Neill. This was his, I think, first big Broadway role, and she almost drove him nuts. And the director as well. The director had to go to the back of the back of the theater. He could no longer direct her. And then she did have another big success with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, along with Joan Crawford, which was a grotesque, where she was playing a grotesque. And if you believe some of the stories in Barbara Lomming's book, you can see a lot that, of course, is very much exaggerated in Baby Jane, but there was a lot of Bette Davis in Baby Jane. And after that, horror films, and she just couldn't find her way until she started making TV movies, and she did find some success there. And then she did have a sort of swan song with Lillian Gish and Lindsay Anderson's The Whales of August. And she was so cruel to Lillian Gish, who was just, a great lady. She looked like a great lady, and she just took it. She just, shook her head at the temperamental aspect of Bette Davis's. Bette Davis was really, she was so insecure by this point in how she looked, and she had cancer and strokes and part of her face, and she was just drinking all the time. So there's the book. This book reads like fiction. Maybe some of it is fiction. I don't know, but it's really a compelling story. And one of the stories in the book is when Bette Davis meets Mae West, and for the first time they had never met. Bette Davis was maybe 10 years younger. Mae West was in her 80s, and Barbara Lomming provides a transcript of that meeting, and it's just hilarious. Bette Davis was sloshed, and Mae West, who did not drink, did not smoke. Bette Davis couldn't understand why Mae West talked normal. So how come you don't talk like you do in the movies? And Mae West would have to keep telling, that was the character. That was the character. It's probably the most entertaining chapter in the novel. Now, as for Little Foxes, how was Bette Davis and Little Foxes having supplied all these negative aspects of how the film was made, and Bette Davis's intransigent to Wyler's direction? Nevertheless, Bette Davis as Bette Davis is still pretty entertaining, and there's one powerful scene in here where the photography, cinematography by Greg Nolan and Wyler's direction is blocking of the actors, and Bette Davis herself this is the scene in The Little Foxes. You have to see The Little Foxes, if nothing else, just to see that one scene, because it is powerful. And she's good in the rest of it, but I think Wyler is true. She's now playing Bette Davis. She's not really playing the character in the kind of complexity that William Wyler always wanted to give to all the characters that he directed. Okay, so thanks a lot to everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.